Hi, John. How are you today?
Hey, Elliot. Good. Like the past couple of weeks, there's a whole host of things going on. I thought we'd just dive into it. And the first is the annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community, which came out recently. This comes from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and it's obviously a combination of a whole series of things that are global and domestic challenges. They list various state actors where there's issues, transnational issues. But I thought I would just highlight a couple quick things. It's a shortish document, about 40 plus pages, but a couple things that are relevant in our world, and that's money laundering issues, cyber issues, human trafficking issues. So some of the things mentioned will be not a surprise. One is that under the category of non-state actor issues, transnational organized crime, so transnational criminal organizations that deal in the movement of illicit drugs like fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, that sort of thing. So Mexico is a dominant producer. So the threat assessment, no surprise there. China remains the primary source for illicit fentanyl, precursor chemicals. So these are things that are not directly related to financial institution reporting, but certainly can be. But then they also mentioned under the category of money laundering and financial crimes that these organizations are laundering billions of dollars of illicit proceeds through U.S. financial institutions, which we know happens. Some use shell and front companies to hide their illicit activities, and some rely on what they call professional money launderers or financial experts. It's a whole gatekeeper issue. Under the category of cybercrime, again, these organizations are doing ransomware that improve their attacks, extorting funds, disrupting critical services, exposing sensitive data. That's part of it. And then just finally, in the category of human trafficking, these transnational criminal organizations and various criminal actors, according to the threat assessment, view human trafficking, sex trafficking, forced labor as low risk crimes of opportunity. So they engage in operations to exploit vulnerable individuals and various groups, coercing, defrauding their victims. Many of these are in the Western Hemisphere and Asia. They're most likely to engage in human trafficking with ties to the United States. And then also there's a section in there on global terrorism. So an interesting report. I always think it's important for AML professionals to look at every possible tool in terms of explaining to senior management why they need to have aggressive compliance, aggressive investigators, and highlighting this report. I think makes sense. Again, it's available online, roughly 40 plus pages. If I'm you, I'm going to do a quick gap assessment in some of these categories and send that along throughout my organization.
I did read the report. This is, of course, the declassified version. It made me wonder for a moment what the classified version must look like, because there's a lot in here, and it's the kind of thing that if someone says, what keeps you up at night? This week it was this. Just pretty scary. I think there are balancing issues that are not the focus of this report, but there's a lot in there. And I think the things you pointed out are very critical for our community, but there's many other things in there as well. State actors and the potential environmental crisis from global warming and health security and many other things. It's interesting in reading reports like this or threat assessments like this to get another chance to think about the breadth of all the things that have to be thought of to really try to create a secure world.
You also highlighted something that the OFAC, DOJ, and Commerce issued late last week.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Commerce, Treasury, principally OFAC, and DOJ issued what they called a tri-seal compliance note. And that's because their three organizational seals are at the top of it. It's about the obligations of foreign-based persons to comply with U.S. sanctions and export controls. I think all of us in the community are aware that all U.S. citizens and permanent resident aliens, no matter where they're located, are subject to complying with the various sanction programs that are issued by the U.S. government through OFAC. That's something that sometimes I think gets lost on people because we talk about how financial services companies should be dealing with it, but you and I as individuals have those same obligations. But there are implications both on the sanction side and on the export control side for non-U.S. persons. So, for example, the note points out Non-U.S. persons are prohibited from causing or conspiring to cause U.S. persons to wittingly or unwittingly violate U.S. sanctions, as well as engaging in conduct that evades U.S. sanctions. And non-U.S. persons who are in the U.S. at any moment along the way, as well as all of their entities, if they're doing business in the U.S., are also subject to U.S. sanctions. The other thing that I thought was important, and you and I have talked about this recently, is that often U.S. export control laws are, I don't want to say ignored, but a little bit forgotten as part of the toolbox of the U.S. government to protect the U.S. and also enforce certain restrictions. And in this case, they specifically talked about certain munitions and dual use items that are controlled through the Export Administration regulations that are under the Export Control Reform Act. Most of us are not as familiar with those as we might be with the sanction programs. But the key coming out of that is the law follows the goods. So again, how do you get to non-U.S. persons? We get to non-U.S. persons because as those goods start to move into global trade, the enforcement and control of the export control laws and the related regulations still applies. The enforcement group is Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS is its acronym. And again, a high point here, BIS actively enforces U.S. export control laws regardless of where the offending party is located. Anyone involved in the movement of items subject to the EAR, and those are the regulations, must adhere to U.S. export control laws. So again, a wide net, not surprising, because if you're trying to manage export limitations, you have to go where the goods go. Otherwise, once they leave the port, you're stuck. But as you pointed out with the threat assessment, this is available online from all three agencies. A valuable read, just as a reminder about the breadth and how you may be looking at transactions and other things to identify suspected suspicious activity.
Two other things. One thing that we haven't talked about, but in the March 9th issue of The Economist, there's an article in there about how anti-corruption investigations and prosecutions are being impacted for various political reasons. So it's a pretty lengthy story. It talks about an investigation that began 10 years ago. It was dubbed Lava Jato, and that's a car wash which was laundering money. It was considered the biggest investigation since the 1990s. A third of Brazil's senators and nearly half of its governors were drawn in to some extent. So the story talks about that case, but also says that Brazil has some pushback on prosecutions for a number of reasons. And Brazil fell 10 places in the annual index perceived corruption released by Transparency International. It's a pretty lengthy piece, couple pages in The Economist, but they're basically saying that some of the aggressive actions of prosecutors went too far, according to some, and it's now resulted in almost more corruption, not just in Brazil, but in Latin America in general. So it's worth looking at. We do cover corruption from time to time, and they do talk about the profits from bribes. There's a chart in there that's worth looking at. And they do, like I said, they mentioned that the U.S. has done some prosecutions because there's been a connection through U.S. institutions, but also, as I said, that the environment's changed a bit because of some of the people in power. Worth looking at, adjacent issue to pure corruption cases, but I thought it was worth highlighting. And then we talked last week about the Alabama case, National Small Business United versus Yellen. This was a federal district court case where they said that the Corporate Transparency Act exceeds Constitution's limits on congressional power and enjoined Treasury and FinCEN from enforcing the Corporate Transparency Act against the particular plaintiffs in that case. FinCEN has appealed, and they say in a statement on their website that they're complying with the court's order and will continue to do as long as that remains in effect. So they're not currently enforcing CTA against the plaintiffs in the action, but if they're not part of that injunction, reporting companies are still required to comply with the law and file beneficial ownership reports as provided for, obviously, in the FinCEN regulations.
Yes, and there have been several press releases about significant numbers of organizations complying with that obligation and putting their information in the registry.
One other thing, very quickly, the U.S. is going through its budget process, which typically is not super exciting for us in the AML world, but I do want to highlight that the president has put out his budget. The Republicans, it just happens to be the case for all you trolls out there. This is fact. This isn't advocacy one way or the other. The Republican response to the 2024 budget proposal would actually lessen the DOJ budget by 3%, FBI's by 6%, and Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms by 7%. So with all the financial crimes still going on, obviously reducing investigations, reducing potential prosecutions, which would be the result of lessening their budgets, is problematic. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. But I did want to highlight that, and you just need to look on the various House and Senate websites for more information.
John, when people hear this on Friday, they will still be able to register for the AML Partnership Forum, which starts next Monday, the 18th.
Yes, and we're very honored to be part of this. As everybody knows, it's a 501c3 organization of private and public sector partners in the financial crime prevention space. And we will have each day conversations with folks in the private sector, but also from the Homeland Security investigations, IRSCI, the FBI, Postal Service, Federal Reserve, other agencies will be there. So people will not only be panelists, but people in the audience will be actively engaged in the various conversations. So we're real proud of this. If you're in the DC area or you're in New York, you can jump on Amtrak and come down for a day or two. It's available on the website. Elliot, you want to remind them again where they can go to get that information?
Yes, amlpf.com.
Great. Sounds good. Looking forward to seeing you this weekend for the conference. And if anybody has any particular questions, again, this will be posted Friday. Give either of us a call or an email. We're happy to help you out.
Yes, and you can still register for our March webinar, which is on countering terrorist financing and its use of virtual assets, which will live stream at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, March 28th. So please go to our website, amlrightsource.com, and register for that. John, anything else?
No, that's good for now. Safe travels, and we'll see you soon.
Sounds great. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.